Welcome to the Vigor Life Podcast, a source of inspiration, lessons, stories, skill sets, mindsets, and strategies to invigorate and expand all areas of your life. Let's go. What's going on, Coach Luka, back with the Vigor Life Podcast. And today is actually maybe the first time that, it's probably not the first time, but it's one of the few cases where I'll do Q&A, not because I don't love Q&A, because I do love Q&A, but it can get pretty crazy with the amount of questions that come in, number one, and being across the board and so on and so forth. And I try to do a lot of answering the questions on, stories, IG stories, on the posts, on Facebook, pretty much with the content that I do. But I always love and appreciate the questions. So, keep them coming in, whatever platform it's coming in through. I always, I would say, put those down, and definitely ones that I feel like I can answer best, I get after it in some way or another, whether it's a post, whether it's some type of content, whether it's a podcast. And like I said, sometimes doing a whole kind of, I would say, whole episode on one topic, because I feel like that can be powerful, where it's just like going deep into stuff where you have actionable steps and knowledge and stuff like that. Now, with that said, I wanted to bring this up because, it doesn't matter, because a lot of the questions I'll be answering are related to coaching, and I would say like fitness industry topics. But the main thing, I really want to pre-frame this, right? Like that right now in the time that we live, if you're not, because I hear this all the time, like, oh man, like I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to do that, or I really want to go into this direction, Luka. I really want to, and I'm going to kind of like fill in the blank here, but let's say, hey, I really want to go into youth sports performance. I really want to, I love food, and I some way, somehow want to like go into the food industry, whether it's opening a restaurant or a, food truck, or start doing this, that, and the other. Now, I bring this up for one reason, because right now, and you still see this, right? I would say, great, like the headlines that pull, and the secret to success, right? There is no secret to success anymore. And what I mean by that is that like they're all out there, right? They're all out. Like I could pull up the phone right now and get every secret to success there is, right? The actual information, actual knowledge, like all of it is out there. Everything. Like, so if you're telling me you don't have the secret, the info, like, man, you're just lazy. Straight up. Like you're just straight up. Like you just don't have the curiosity to do it. And I'll tell you how I know some of this stuff too, is when people hit me up, and they'll hit me up about something that they could find on Google within a minute, right? Like getting good at, like, I feel that the skill set of being curious and finding stuff out, figuring shit out, is like one of the most powerful skills that you can have. But when I'm like, hold up, they took the time to message me, but if they like spent even like 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes researching it, they could get like a really good answer by somebody that's very, very respectable and what I call believable, right? So like most of the information is free. If you're willing to, I would say free information, you certainly have to filter through it, and you have to sometimes piece it together, and it takes a lot of time. Or you can do, go from respected, I would say, people that have been there, done that, still doing it, achieve success in that area, and get resources from them. Obviously, to me, always the best way to go about it is mentorship, coaching, directly as much as possible, masterminds, like direct one-on-one coaching. But then there's also seminars. There's also courses. I think how we're going to go reverse on that, right? Seminars, courses, and then you have, books, or even things like podcast videos, things of that nature, right? A lot of it is free. And, kind of like as you go up, they're more of an investment. And like in the last 2 weeks, I've spent like $5,000 just, investing in 3 courses. Like it was 3 specific things that I wanted to get better at, or that I really, really admired and respected the person that was speaking about this topic, and I liked their viewpoint on it, and I wanted to dig deep, and these are not cheap courses, but they're high level, and they're kind of like blueprint, right? Meaning blueprint, like I go through it, I apply the stuff, like, I can get ahead faster. But with that said, this is like a check. This is a check to you if you're like saying that there's something that you really want to get better at and good at, and it's like you feel, or you outwardly say that you don't have the knowledge or information. It's there, right? It's there, all of it. No secret to success. Straight up, you really, and I always, it comes back to the I just talked to a friend last week and talking about like being, it's like, man, after work, I'm tired. And I was like, man, tired to work on a project that he says he's really into, which, and I said, look, man, you're not tired, you're uninspired, right? You're not tired, you're uninspired. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, because I've had experiences with, fatigue and not sleeping enough and things of that nature, that, those things are important. But there's also a really long period of time where I would say, I worked way too much and didn't sleep optimally, but I was inspired. So that drove me, right? And still does to this day. And so with that said, two different things, like info is all out there. It's there, period. You know what I mean? And what is the thing that you can tap into to be inspired? And sometimes, like, look, I can't remember who said this, but sometimes there's going to be things that you're going to be unhappy. Like, you're going to be unhappy wanting to do that thing until you actually do it and do it for a while. And then that's going to bring you happiness doing it. Right. So, don't look for inspiration, like right off the bat. Like, man, work gets you inspired. Like, work gets you motivated. And with that, like, it brings me to first couple of questions. And number one is put it this way. I'm going to revert back here because Steven asked questions, say, hey, what are some of the key indicators that gym ownership is the right move? And you could actually replace this like, hey, what is a key indicator that, fill in the blank is the right move? So for instance, I give an example of being a restaurant owner, or just being in the food industry. And I would say, exposure, as much exposure as possible. So what is a way to get exposure without having that massive risk of or big risk of investment, taking out loans, or going down this career path that, like, even if you sign a 5-year lease, well, shit, like, now you're committed to this thing. So I would say get as involved in the nitty gritty as possible. So for instance, if you've been a coach for a while, that means starting to do things that you're going to have to do as a business owner. Because remember, you're going to juggle a lot of stuff. So when you look at, the fitness industry, it's like, hey, you're going to have to create content. You're going to have to manage, meaning you're going to have to manage finances. You're going to have to strategize marketing. You're going to have to create sales systems. So whatever position you're in, how can you get more involved in that? I've seen a lot of these situations where coaches are like, hey, I want to open my own gym. And year after year after year, it's like where there's an opportunity created, I'll say, hey, listen, you want to do some of this? Like, I'll not only coach you and mentor you this direction, but you're gonna have to do the work. Like, you're gonna have to learn how to do some of these things. And if that step's not taken, automatically I'm like, hey, that might not be the best fit for you, right? Because the only way for you to actually get more insight and know whether this is for you or if this is what, because it might be a shit ton of hard work, but you might enjoy it, like, right? And so with that said, like, the exposure, as you're working on it, do you go like, man, I can see myself doing this? Or like, you're fired up. Maybe it's hard, but like, you're still fired up to do it. See what I'm saying? So, because it's very difficult to say, I can't tell you how many scenarios we've had going, where it's like internship. We had an intern that turned into a coach. When I talked to them, what is it that you want to achieve? And there would be, this like, well, I want to open up my own gym someday too. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I don't know what your goal is. Like, whatever your vision is, like, we can work towards that, right? Somewhere down the line. But, after a year, 2 years, it's like, you know what, man, I don't want to have my own gym, right? Because there's that insight of like, shit, man, like, that's a lot of work. Like, holy crap, now I see what you're doing. I don't know if I want to do that, right? And I think that's very, very important. Like, whatever, like I said, this friend that I mentioned that talked about the food industry, I said, look, number one, I said, like, you cook well. You're a great cook, right? But you've got no exposure, meaning interning in a kitchen, helping out there. setting up events with food, like doing these mini projects that you're not throwing yourself fully into it. Because once you commit to a business, like you lease a building, you put $50 grand into equipment or $100 grand into equipment, like sign a long-term lease, start hiring people, you can get out of it, sure, but that's going to be costly, right? And so once you're in, you're kind of in, like it's like the mob, at least for a while. But same thing here, like how do you get exposure? How do you put yourself in that environment? And then when you're working in that environment, like you'll get some, like the voice, the gut will give you some answers. It will, I wanted to say this before I say, hey, just listen to your gut, because I think that's sometimes, I do feel that's the kind of the answer, but I think the only way that you could get true kind of insight and answers for yourself is to do it, and not to do it for a little bit, but like do it for do it for a year, do it for 2 years. I think it's vastly kind of like people do some stuff for 2-3 months, and then it's like, oh well, I don't think this is for me, and I'm like, man, you can't really know, like and not only do you do it, like don't do it full blown. Don't do it half-assed and half-heartedly, because when you go half-heartedly into anything, you're never going to really truly get the answer. You're not, like straight up, and then down the line, you end up doing what if I gave it my all? Like, would it have been different? Absolutely would have been different, because every time you give it your all, like you get better feedback, period. You learn a skill set, like your integrity is intact because you're like, man, I put in my best effort into this and I did it for a while. And even though maybe it's not the thing that you want to do, you'll have learned a ton from it. You have become better at something. Maybe you built the skill set of sales, some management, leadership, understanding numbers better, understanding strategy better, understanding time management for yourself and your team better. Like you're going to learn some things, and then you might be like, hey, you know what? I figured out this is not for me. But through that challenge, you're going to see what might be a better thing, right? But going in only half-assed, not exposing yourself to these different areas that you may not be doing now. So for a coach, right? Like I can tell you right away, like when you're coaching is like, there's a lot of responsibilities there. Program design, the actual coaching, the follow-up and, the accountability, then your own, like the time management for your own self, right? So everything from check-ins to this, to that, to strategy sessions, to depending on which gym you work at. So, there's a bunch of responsibility, but now you look at, I'd say, hey, talk to a business owner that would go like, what are the things that I would have to be doing here, right? And there's a lot, and then start doing those. Put your foot into the door and start taking some of those things over, and you'll get some answers, because guess what? You're going to take more ownership, more responsibility, and then you're going to see like, man, this is really hard, but I like this. Like I can see myself, this is making me better, this is helping me grow. I think this is the direction I'm going to go into. So I think that's a little longer answer to that question, but hopefully, like I said, it gives insight, because anything that I go into, I get exposure. I've started, actually a while back, started doing real estate. And what I mean by doing real estate is like, me and my friend Steve Krebs, we bought an apartment building in upstate New York. And that was our project. It was like going into doing something, getting exposure, going through the process and having, a person that manages that building and does this, that, and the other, right? Like then there was another project with obviously buying this building, and it was like a 2.5 year process, right? Like you go, and then from there I was like, okay, like, man, I understand this. I built some skill sets around it. Like, now we're looking at this at third building, right? Like, and I'm dabbling in these things but without exposure, like that doesn't happen. I don't see whether I like this or what the possibilities are. So you got to go in, like you have to go in, and you can't just go in for, like, imagine I'm like, doing something for a couple of months going like, I don't know, man. Like, man, this was like I said, 2-3 year process. And I think I shared this before, like in 1 year, I had 117 meetings around the building, right? From construction to architects, to the city, to permitting, to subcontractors, to the bank. I mean, you name it. Like that's one every 3 days, essentially. And like, man, I learned so much. But that's diving in, and that's exposure. Another question for Derek was, which is it's taken a little bit of a turn, but it's kind of connected. So, What's the biggest thing that you see trainers not doing during their sessions with clients? This is definitely a very loaded question, and part of it is because it depends where you're looking at, right? So, I might have my own thoughts around what happened, because the thing that I focus on the most is Vigor Ground and our coaches, right? Like our team, and then obviously I'm always looking at the best of the best that I can learn from. So I'm not trying to go out and say and see what people that aren't doing things right are doing, right? I'm trying to model the best. But with that said, I would kind of bring up two things. And you may have, some of it is cliche-ish, but number one is focus. And the focus of during that training session, like there's nothing else that exists in that world but that client or those clients, depending on, if it's a one-on-one session, a semi-private session, a group training session. Being able to keep your focus on the most important thing, which is the client, I would say that's massively missing. Now, of course, you have this kind of, 0 to 10, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, or a scale of 0 to 10, how engaged, focused, and present are you in that training session? It's usually not going to be a 10 or a 0. It's going to be somewhere in between. I would even say that, it roller coasters during that training session. And to become the greatest coach that you can be is to be able to bring that number up throughout the training session. And I've talked, a lot about, I would say that to me, the tactical and strategic parts of coaching and training session, but being there and being present and not being distracted by, a whole bunch of different things. Like that's number one. And of course you've heard the things that are cliche and you see them online, the coach that that's on their phone, right? It's like, hey, do another 5 reps. They're on their phone. They're doing this, that, and the other. And I think that's kind of like that extreme, certainly. Whereas I think that there's a lot of coaches that are doing great things and are very engaged. But how do you kind of like push that marker? And of course, then there's a lot of things that mix and mingle here, meaning, becoming better at recognizing, body language and patterns. And, some people don't like for you to be all up in their stuff and coaching them too much, and being able to read like social awareness, emotional awareness, having the right cue at the right time, not saying too much, right? Those are all skill sets that you build over time. But the overarching theme of that is, being really, really focused during that training session. And look, we understand, right? The more focused you are, the more your brain gets zapped, right? I mean, your brain is what, like 2 pounds, and it uses 25% of the glycogen in the body, right? Because it's just a lot of work thinking. It's a lot of work being present and staying focused. And so at the end of training sessions, like you're going to be like zapped and tired, right? But to me, like a successful day of coaching I used to be smoked, but it was like a good smoke. Like, man, I felt fulfilled. Versus, I'm just going throughout the day, I'm going through the motions and like being able to, especially if you've been in the industry for years, or you're going to be in the industry for years or decades, that becomes a foundational like habit. The habit becomes, are you very focused during your training sessions, or do you wither off? Do you just kind of start zoning out, or like, hey, you've been in an industry, back to the whole, are you tired, or are you tired, or are you uninspired? But I've been doing this for a long time, and like when I coach, man, there's nothing. I love coaching. I love being there. Nothing else exists for me, and sometimes I have to remind myself too, because we have this kind of dichotomy of like, hey, marketing and putting stuff on Instagram stories, taking a picture, where a lot of sessions I'm like, oh shit, I didn't do that because I'm so into the training session. So, even having that skill set of like, yeah, okay, you need to market and you need to do some of that, but like, man, go right back to what you were doing and be focused on the session. So that's a big part of that is the focus. And that happens with, being intentional, obviously, just like truly being intentional, having reminders, and last podcast, when I talked about courage and empowerment in class and self-respect and like how to build those, how to have the values and integrity. Well, that falls in line with that, right? Like is having intention every day, going in and being prepared. So that's number 2, right? Number 2 is like being prepared. I see this a lot. And being prepared is not just I got the program, right? That's not being prepared. It's a part of it. But it's also coming in on time, seeing how the gym is set up, like what's going on. Is there a bigger team training class? Are you gonna have to move some stuff around? Being there as soon as the client comes in, high-fiving them, checking kind of their body language. Where are they at? I like to say that from a scale of 1 to 10, a client is always going to be somewhere between there on an energy level, on an energy scale. So very few are going to come in as a 10. You do get that here and there, but a lot of people might be a 2. And, my goal is to bring them up 2 points, right? So if they're a 2, I want to bring them to a 4. If they're a 5, I want to bring them to a 7. But not like, mistake people make is bringing people to a 10, right? So they're really down and you're like, hey, let's go, let's go, let's get fired up. Like, life is awesome, right? That's not a good bet. Like that's too much for them, right? But once again, that's preparation. Having a story on a 4x6 card for me for when I'm doing team training, small groups or semi-privates, that's preparation. And going into it, like for instance, that morning or the night before, like, hey, what are the things that I'm going to focus on the next day? What I want to get out of that session. It really is like planning and preparing to succeed. And then you have obviously a target, and guess what? It's a lot easier to shoot at something that's clear and as a target versus not doing it. And coaching is one of those things where it's hard, right? To be very present, to be very engaged, to be on point is difficult. And so what happens for a lot of coaches over the years, because this is not just like hey, you're new in industry, but like over the years, what happens is it's like that analogy I've shared before of a plane on a runway that's just a little off. Actually, there's a true story about this, horrific accident of a plane that crashed into a mountain that was just a little bit off, right? Just a little bit off. And the sensors of the compass kind of didn't detect it. But just a couple of degrees off on the runway, you can't even see it, right? You can't see it. Like you couldn't tell like, oh, that plane's pointing in the wrong direction because just a little bit. But after you fly for like 10 hours, you're so far off, like you're tens of miles off. You might even land in another country, right? And that's how coaching is. That one day you're fatigued, you come in and you're a little less sharp, right? You're not paying attention to clients as much. You're on your phone a little bit more. You come in a little bit later. Your energy's down a little bit, and you're like, all right, cool. Well, you don't really think about it. The next day you do it again. It's just a little bit, right? Unnoticeable. Like the slight edge, right? 365 days later, man, you're not as focused of a coach. You're not as on point. You're not as sharp. You're not as on time. You're not as present. You know what I mean? And you're not. I would say, doing what the clients deserve, and that's a slippery slope, right? And I believe that what's really important is obviously to have a community of people that keep you in check. That's not happening. So that whether it's a group, whether it's a team, whether it's the environment, but also obviously it's your personal responsibility. And look, it's fucking not easy. Like if it was easy, like everybody be doing it. I mean, like it's a dedication to excellence. Like that's what it is. And it's obviously there's discipline that goes along with it, but there's certain tools and tactics that you can employ to become better at that. Okay. So I'm going to zap out of here to go to, I would say, a second set of questions that we had. All right. Okay. So, this is always kind of the question of what is the one, fill in the blank, book, resource, this, that. It's always very, very difficult because, it really depends on where you're at. Like, when I spend time with my team, and if they do ask for a resource, I mean, usually what ends up happening is we have a conversation. And if you go back to one of the podcasts that I did just a while back called The Coaching Habit, about the 7 questions, which is a phenomenal tool for leadership and actually helping people, guiding people to get the right answers or the next thing, right? It really depends. So, one of my coaches, like, right now that like that big, I would say, obstacle is like sales, right? Hasn't done much sales in the past, kind of been avoiding them. Now we're at this point where the conversation around it is, how important sales are. Not the car salesman sales, but just, persuading people and influencing people in the direction that they want to go. Now, obviously for him too, the conversion process, right? Like taking somebody like where he's great at doing certain coaching aspects, but then not being able to, I would say, influence the person to make a buying decision, which is certainly hurting them, right? So the resources and my guidance and mentorship is in that direction. So the question is, what's the one thing, the book, website, et cetera, that I recommend for a business owner for finances, or I would say financial kind of diligence. Let's just call it that. And like, once again, this is a difficult one because I don't know which area you're in. Like Ramit Sethi's book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, is a great one for like really basic things really basic things, honestly, very important things, foundational things, but, paying off credit card debt, like understanding money, understanding, how things work in your personal life, how to better manage, budget, invest, and not get screwed, really, I think that's a very important one, a great resource. And it's not just the book. There's a lot of resources. There's a site, and obviously Ramit does a lot of stuff, including courses and things like that. For a business owner, I think one of the better ones, once again, this is a model as well, but it's also a book. It's called Profit First. And the Profit First model, I think is one of those things. If a business owner is starting, I don't know, if any type of small business, medium-sized business, I think they should have a foundation in understanding that profit first, being able to pay themselves, but also how to, I would say, distribute funds, and just understanding that kind of 10,000-foot, bird's eye view of finances. Because to be honest with you, like many people don't, that transition from coach to business owner, I think if you have a good grasp, because some people say, well, I'm not a business owner yet, so I don't need some of that. And I would have you consider that that's not the case. Like, you have to understand finances before that, right? How do you invest your money? Do you take, 15, 20%, at least 10% of every dollar that you make and put it on the side? That's a skill set. That was one of the most valuable things that I started doing as a young coach in the industry was, one of my, I would say, my back then boss and mentor and now really great friend, Chip Swarzel, said, hey, listen, man, kind of richest man in Babylon philosophy, put at least 10%. I was putting 20 and more percent on the side. And then I had to only work with the rest. But those investments compounded, and obviously, those were a big. That philosophy was a big part of me being able to be very cerebral and deliberate about, saving money to be able to make a huge investment in this building. So these basic foundational principles, I think, are the key. So those are the two. Like I said, there's a lot more things that I think are important, but check into those two. I Will Teach You How to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, and Profit First. And I'm honestly blanking on the authors right now, which is pretty sad because I should know this, but pull that up on Amazon because it's a great book, and then you can go deeper into other resources from it. The next one is I feel like I've talked about this, but I do. It comes up a lot, and I think it's very important. And the question is how to be more self-confident. So let me take a couple steps back to me, the most powerful, I would say, analogy or kind of story of how self-esteem works, okay? And self-esteem is pretty much like when you say that you're going to do something, if you do that thing, you get a credit in your bank account, okay? If you say that you're going to do a thing and you don't do it, you're going to get a debit in your bank account. And over time, those build up, okay? So for a lot of people, they'll say they're going to do stuff. And this has nothing to do with me telling somebody else. Sure, that matters too. But the most important part is like you telling it to yourself. Hey, I'm going to get up tomorrow morning. I'm going to do 10 minutes of mobility, right? You get up, you snooze it. Fuck, I didn't do it, right? Boop, debit in your credit, in your bank account, okay? Hey, before I go to sleep, I'm gonna read 20 pages of a book. Come back really exhausted, fuck it, I'll turn on Netflix, watch that, boop, debit. And so, and it's little things, like, hey, I'm gonna have a salad for lunch, burger, right? And that starts building up. And so confidence is basically, imagine that once those debits really build up, you got all this debt and you're trying to gain confidence from something that you're about to do and there's nowhere to take from. You're bankrupt, right? You're bankrupt. But if you do the things that you say and you build that credit, right? And you have plenty, like you can fuck up a lot too, but you got plenty of credit. So the confidence is there, the self-esteem is there. Now, you might say like, okay, that's all good and dandy, Luka, but how do I change? Like if I'm massively in debt with my self-esteem, like how do I change that? Because look, I mean, there's a lot of shit that like, if I would be perfect if I did everything that I said I'd do to myself, right? Sometimes those things are small, but man, but I've built that credit so high, right? That I can make those mistakes and get back on track. One of the big mistakes, and I would say this is what New Year's resolutions are essentially based on, right? It's like the previous year you had a resolution and then you fell off. And then between a year, you might have gone up and down or whatever it may have been. But next year comes around and like, all right, this year I'm going to do it. But instead of doing small things, you try to take on big things, right? Because you feel bad like about failing. You feel bad about dropping off. So it's like, nah, man, this year I'm training 6 days a week and I'm going on this detox and I'm going on this challenge. And on top of that, I'm going to do meal delivery service. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do this. And so so it's like you actually do the opposite of kind of like what will bring you closer to success, which is you pile on more tasks. So think about the logic of that, right? Like you fell off having, I don't know, 2-3 things that you wanted to do. Then you get pissed off and then you take on 8, right? Because you're like, no, this time around, I'm going to get serious. I have willpower. I'm going to get motivated. And that's, it's kind of counterintuitive where I believe you should do less, right? Do less, but do it. Do small things, but do them and then do them consistently. Hey, listen, I'm going to go for a 5-minute walk tomorrow, a 10-minute walk tomorrow. And you do it. Bam. And now you hit that credit, right? And like those debts start becoming smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But that's the thing is like, make it too easy, right? People go like, oh, that sounds really easy. Cool. And then you should have no problem in doing that. Writing for 5 minutes a day. That sounds easy. Only until you have to do it. So make things smaller, right? Make things smaller and make those deposits. Because once you keep getting those deposits, and like, I like the stuff like the visual stuff when you have a calendar in front of you, and you put the big red X on, day 1, day 2, day 2, because your brain likes patterns. So it's like, let's say you go 3 days in a row, right? And then the 4th day, you don't do something in the morning, but you see that, man, that there's no X on today. Fuck it. Like, I'm going to do this for lunch, right? Because you want to see that continuity. And after 30 days of a small task, like, man, you feel like you look at that calendar, you're like, man, like I got 27 out of 30 days. Like that's building confidence, right? So really confidence is doing the work, but confidence is also, doing the things that you said you do for yourself more so than others. Like where I say where it comes into play that, to leverage others, meaning like this is one of my big leverage points. And I've talked about this before that like my relationships, like people I care about, I trust, I don't want to let down, I respect them. I'm going to leverage those people, meaning like, hey, we got a meeting? Fuck it, I got to be there, right? Hey, I said I'm going to do this charity. I got it, man, I can't mess this up. I got to be there, right? That's my leverage. So sometimes, you may not, I would say, have high enough self-esteem to kind of keep yourself accountable. So then use other people. And what I mean by that, when I say use, I don't mean that in any negative connotation. I mean in the best of ways. This is why groups, this is why masterminds, this is why communities, organizations, are so powerful, because you connect yourself to them, and then you're not just accountable to yourself, you're accountable to the group. Where I do feel that like, hey, listen, success is being accountable to yourself. But at a certain point in time, man, you might have so much debt that it's hard for you to keep yourself accountable. So this is when you reach out. This is when you go and seek the people you trust, respect, and look up to, and they become a big source of accountability. And you hear Craig Ballantyne talk about this. My friend Craig Ballantyne, the perfect life formula, the perfect day formula, and I completely agree with it. Like, same thing, using the leverage, like not letting people down. Man, like Jay Ferrugia texted me about some shit. Is like, man, why you not doing this? I'm like, fuck, man, he's right. I don't want to let him down, right? Like, and number one is you shouldn't want to let yourself down. But hey, this is important. Like, we are social creatures, and why not like improve yourself? We've heard about iron sharpens iron, right? I mean, that's what it really is. Like, use that iron. Maybe you're blunt right now, but use that iron to sharpen yourself, right? And somebody else might be real sharp. Fuck it. You know what I mean? Like, use that. Get around that. That's why environments are so important. So that's it's not, obviously, it's like majority of the shit that I'm going to say, like most things in life that are simple but very, very hard. And so I think that's kind of the gist of it. But I do think if you take that into account and you start thinking in that direction and going like, hey, how can I put some, credit versus debit every day into my self-esteem? Like, you're going to just keep getting better and better and better and better and build on that. And you're going to be able to take on bigger and bigger and bigger things. There's a question that I think where it's going, I think I know where it's going, but what do you think of a trainer working for a corporate gym like an Equinox? Also something that I've mentioned before. I think people put a lot of negative connotation to or attachment to working for a big box gym. I think it's an incredible opportunity. Because one, it depends how you look at it, especially a gym like Equinox. There's pluses and minuses to everything. But look, if you've ever ran your own business, you understand it's very difficult, right? To create positioning, branding, generate leads. And generating leads, and I talked about this with Mike Robertson in one of the past podcasts, is look, you're either going to have to use time or money to market, right? And for all small business, the money part is always a problem. And what I mean always a problem is like, hey, you might have it, but you're never going to outspend bigger companies, period. You can't. Like, even if you're killing it, like, your revenue is probably like a small percentage of a big company's like marketing budget, right? Like, that doesn't mean you're not doing great. It's just the way it is. So you're going to have to use time-based strategies, writing content, doing podcasts, doing videos, writing a lot, whether it's on social media, on a blog, guest articles, going to lunch and learns, going and doing seminars, right? I mean, I can keep going with this, with different strategies and poles in the water. But when you are at a big box gym, one thing that you have around you is you have a ton of leads, right? Thousands usually. Now, you have other coaches competing against you for sure. But one thing that the gym is doing for you, they're doing the marketing, they're paying for a lot of stuff, the equipment, the resources, all of that, right? Now, you may, like, of course, I could right now, like, just completely flip the script on this and go like, and here's all these bad things, but fuck that. Like, we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on the positives and your mindset on it, because this is a great opportunity for you to learn a lot of the skill sets, being focused as a coach, being prepared as a coach, building up your brand as a coach. And more than anything, the most important thing is helping a lot of people transform and getting and creating that value and helping people in the world. Because guess what? That racks up. Then you have success stories, you have referrals, you have a brand, you have a reputation, right? And it makes it a lot easier for you. Now, I'm also going to tell you a little story about that I think is a phenomenal story, because one of my business coaching clients, Steven Thieber, who is doing some online coaching, but he works at a Gold's Gym. And a conversation became, which direction to go, how to grow. Like, should I open up my own spot? Should I do this, that, or the other? These Gold's Gyms are not corporate owner franchises. So there's a little more leeway. And obviously the people that own them can do a good amount of they're flexible in what they're doing. And Steve's a really good nutrition coach. And so we kind of constructed a plan of, him becoming I would say, the leader of doing nutrition inside of that gym. and doing seminars, so on and so forth. And then we started working on a presentation on like, hey, how could you implement, nutrition coaching within the gym and actually generate money for the gym? Because remember, it's important. What's in it for them? You always got to think about that. What's in it for the big box gym, for the business? And over months, we constructed this plan, did a presentation, and now, he's got his first seminar coming up with already over 100 people registered. We have a whole plan on the back end on, doing nutrition coaching, and there's 10,000 clients in those 3 gyms, if not more. And so that's the client base. So, it's going in the direction of generating a good amount, like a lot of money for the gym, but also for him. Right. And once again, like with the perspective of like, man, like these guys, like I don't like them, this, that, the other, like I could do all my own, like you're now missing out on this opportunity where he went in and, believed in kind of the direction that I pushed him in, that like, hey, there's all these other possibilities. And now all this is opening up. And like I said, it's just the beginning stages. And, who knows where we could go from that. But this is the different perspective of thinking versus going like, man, like I'm just working for these guys and like, fuck these guys and and it's like you're missing opportunities to actually elevate yourself. And I have this question I always go like, hey, listen, are you escalating a situation or are you elevating a situation? And you can do that in anything. Like, somebody sends you an email, you can do one or the other. You're at a certain business. And maybe that's not the place that you want to be like the longest term. But while you're there, how can you leave, it's like the legacy. How can you leave the place better than when you started, right? And the All Blacks say, hey, leave the jersey in a better place than when you put it on, right? And I believe that for everything. If I'm going to be part of anything, any organization, any place, if I leave and move on to go somewhere else, I want to know that I left it better than when I got there, right? And that's part of legacy. That's part of responsibility. And I think that too many people working for another business, even if they don't have like massively aligned values, like I said, with some, bigger box gym or something like that, you're missing opportunities. Because if you left it better than you found it, you in that process are now building skill sets that are going to really help you down the line. Okay. And also like you don't, doing it the right way, you don't burn bridges, you create new relationships, new connections. If, it's like the Zig Ziglar saying like, hey, you help people get what they want, you'll always have what you want. And when I worked at Vision Quest, that was my perspective. And, interestingly enough, full circle now, me and Chip, who was my boss and has done incredible things with big box gyms, from, like I said, going from 24-hour fitness to pure fitness to then, buying Vision Quest, buying and building Vision Quest and selling and now owning the Move Fitness franchise. And I've started, doing stuff, I would say there. In, how does that happen, right? Like, because you don't burn bridges, because you're a promise keeper. So those are very, very important things that like you can either do, us against them, or you can go like, hey, how can I elevate this situation? And in the process, learn the most that I can learn and also in improve my situation. So how can I help them? How can I, help myself for the good of all? All right. There's too much battling. I think every time I have a conversation with a person that I would say every time is exaggerated, but majority of the times when I have a conversation with a person that works for a, quote unquote bigger box club, and you could laterally take this to any business, right? It's like, oh man, like they're not doing this, they're not doing that, and maybe a lot of things aren't good, but or the way that you deserve for them to be, but you have the capacity to change that situation. You have the capacity to be your best self in there. You have the capacity to take a leadership role. We talk about leadership, and I just shot a interview with John Russin. You just check that out on his site about leadership and the 5 traits that I believe are some of the most important traits. And the number one is starting with like a personal leadership philosophy. So like just because you work somewhere, it doesn't mean that you cannot like employ and live up to your values, right? Of your own personal leadership philosophy. And if those things are, hey, like being a go-giver or impact or integrity or honesty or, loyalty, making, making your coaching session the best part of the client's day, right? Having only good days and great days. Like these are all, I would say mantras and values that you can live up to in any place, like in any place, right? If you're somewhere else, you're still an entrepreneur, okay? Which I think most people kind of do very well. So I hope that answers the question, but like I'm trying to shine a light on a lot of opportunities, right? And opportunities rather than just looking at the downsides and all the things that are wrong. We got time for a couple more here. And let's see. How to build towards entrepreneurial goals while working with kids fitness, etc. I think the etc. is a difficult one, but how to build towards entrepreneurial goals. And the question about entrepreneurial goals is like really comes down to clarity. See, like, and the reason why I'm picking this one is because clarity is massively important. Okay, entrepreneurial goals. I mean, even that like, what does that mean? Right? Does that mean having your own business? Does that mean being an entrepreneur? Does that mean doing multiple different things? And for me, it's always like, hey, whatever you're doing, like really focus on becoming the best at that. But also at the same time in coaching, because this is essentially a little bit of a fitness question here too, is, Eric Cressy just put a tweet out today about like, first you have to become a generalist, like a really good generalist before you can go and become a specialist and go into a certain niche. And, I see a lot of coaches now, like they're just starting and they're like, hey, I'm an expert at XYZ. And it's like, I mean, that in and of itself is crazy, right? Because if you haven't been doing it for years and years and years, then you can't be an expert in that. So you have to be a generalist before you become a specialist. And when you're a great generalist, what happens is that like your width is much bigger, meaning that like, hey, I would say, we don't have this crazy niche of basketball players, this, that. Like we're a transformation gym. But hey, we get athletes. We get people we get a lot of people coming from rehab because we have a lot of physical therapists referred to us. But, fat loss, from, sports performance in different specific sports to this, that, and the other. But only because, I coach thousands of people in being a generalist. Okay. And so, One, I would say becoming a great generalist at the things that you do. And then look, first of all, going back to the clarity, what is it that you want to achieve? Like, and what I mean by what is it that you want to achieve is like, hey, 5 years from now, like what's your ideal life, your day, your business, and drawing it out. And that's important because it's like, okay, cool. Well, I want to have a gym. I want to coach clients. I want to work on the business. My day looks like this. I have 3 coaches. We're doing this much in revenue. And the thing is, maybe that's not exactly what's going to happen, but you have a target, right? You imagine about what is it that means. Like even entrepreneurial goals. Cool. What are your entrepreneurial goals, right? So you have a target 5 years from now. Then you can reverse engineer and you have some clarity. And there's like, man, there might be 500 steps between where you are right now and where you need to go. Cool. What's the next one? Right? So if it's like, hey, I'm training kids out of another facility. What would be the next step? Well, man, first, the next step would be to get to making 6 figures from that. All right, cool. Let's reverse engineer that, because the next step after that would be maybe opening my own facility. Okay. But first, we got to generate a certain amount of revenue and, bring some coaches. And that has a bunch of steps underneath it, right? Growing your groups, having more private clients, having a better system for marketing, better system for sales, systems for, everything. But then if you're starting to hire, what is that going to be like? Who do you want to bring on board? What are the values of the company, right? Now, I know this can be overwhelming, but the thing is like you have to have a very clear goal so that you can actually determine what the next step is. Because if it's not clear, like it's like somebody says, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. What does that mean? What does being an entrepreneur mean to you? Well, it means that like I have freedom. Okay, cool. But what is it do you want to be an entrepreneur? Like, what do you want to build? How do you want to serve the world? Right? What is the skill set that you want to help people solve their problems with? What are the solutions? Right? You have to start clarifying this stuff to see the next step. And then you just work on the next step, right? You don't have to know all the steps. You just have to work the next step, right? And the next step is everything from like, it could be very simple. And I just talked about self-esteem. It could be very simple. Okay. So hopefully that answers the question. But like I said, without clarity, man, you're just shooting in the dark. Last one from Chris. How to deal with staff that doesn't understand appropriate boundaries between coaches and clients. Now I wanted to bring this one up because this could be a fill in the blank, right? So how to deal with staff that don't understand, and then fill in the blank. And I would say, like, number one, it starts with it being your fault and taking responsibility for it. And here's what I mean by that, okay? If they're not completely clear on what the boundaries are and what the rules are and what the values are of the company, then that means that you haven't communicated them well and created that environment of understanding. So that means there's a lack of, I would say, non-negotiables. Right? So if I came in and said, hey, listen, okay, cool. If I ask everybody and say, do you guys know what the non-negotiables are? And I could go specific. Do you know what the non-negotiables are when it comes to, coaching client? And if everybody gave me the same answer right on point, then it'd be like, okay, cool, they know. 99.9% of the time, that's not going to happen. Most people are going to be like, what? Non-negotiables? I don't know what you're talking about. Or maybe they'll say something, but it'll all be different. Well, that means that hasn't been set and communicated well. So step number one for everything is, and like, first of all, I'm saying, like, I've dropped the ball on this many a times. Like, we're coming back and doing Vigor University just to set a whole new set of ground rules and raise the standards up. Right, in the coming weeks, that's what we're doing, just so that we can raise the standards. So with that being said, it starts with you, right? Because one, setting those boundaries, setting clear values, standards, expectations, and that way, and then keeping people accountable to it. Because remember, if something was done for a long time, years and years and years, a certain way, and then you come in and you go like, well, listen, now we're gonna do it like this, right? Don't expect people, like, first of all, you have to live by that, like you have to live by that fucking, like, number one. Like, you have to be the person that lives up to those standards and expectations. And for everybody to see that, and then to do it for a while, not just for, like, you do it for 2 weeks and you're like, see, like, do it like me. No. You can't even say it. You just got to live it. And then number two, you got to keep everybody accountable to that for a while before that becomes the new standard and the new culture and the new values. So, that's how you do it. Now, if you see that somebody is not doing that, then that is a value-based decision that you got to make. Hey, that doesn't fit within our values. It's not. It's crushing the non-negotiables, and it's going outside of the boundaries of what we want the excellence and relationships to be here. And then you make a decision. You let that person go, right? Sounds simple? It's not. Well, it's simple, but it's hard, right? And I think for every single one of those things, you have to go back to yourself and go like, hey, obviously I didn't make this clear. Man, maybe I'm not, check yourself first. Are you living by that, right? Because every single time it would come back to me. Like, some shit went wrong. It's like, man, I allowed that. I hired that person. Or like, can I really say that, like, I've been living up to this value 100% of the time, or like even 90% of the time? But if it's a value, I mean, shit, like, you should be shooting for perfection. You may not be perfect, but you should be shooting for perfection and be close to that, damn it. You know what I mean? So that's where it begins. Rather, like, because I could give you the corporate answer. It's like, well, step one, give him one warning. And you could, obviously, that's part of the tactical strategic stuff, like the 2 strikes you're out or 3 strikes you're out, or whatever you employ in that manner. But here's the thing. If you have that, if you're going tactical without first looking at the environment and the foundations of what has been communicated, then that's irrelevant. That's irrelevant, right? Okay. Kind of running out of time on this one. We had a lot more questions. We're going to definitely come back to that. Like I said, I enjoy doing those and hopefully give as much insight from my experiences and things I've learned to where they help you in your career, in your coaching, in your business. And with that said, as always, guys, I love and appreciate, every single time you guys leave a review, give the 5 stars, share the podcast, talk about the podcast. It's been growing a lot more, like I said, people reaching out. And to me, like, what's powerful, like I said, is that I get feedback on how it's helping people. Like, and if it's helping them move even a little bit further forward, that's all that matters, right? Like, and remember, the goal of this podcast is to, once you listen to it, you reflect on it, meaning you have the lesson that you heard, and you reflect on that lesson, you take action on that lesson as soon as you possibly can, which means today, right? If you're 10 minutes in and you heard something, man, stop the podcast, go do it if you possibly can, because that's how you'll grow, right? It's like learning, application, reflection, course correction, and then repeat. And so with that said, hey, share it, leave a review. I love and appreciate you, and I thank you for your time, for listening to this, and be on the lookout for the next Vigor Life podcast. Coach Luka's out.